Twisted, Chapter 3. The very moment it happened, Jeff knew. He hadn't been in the room at the time, although the nice nurse with the purple stethoscope had let him in to see Grandma on 3 different occasions, when nothing urgent was planned to occur. He got to hold her hand then, mumble meaningless things to ears which couldn't hear, before the trauma nurses would arrive to tactfully, but firmly, request their space back. He didn't dare look under the slick blue sheet which they'd draped over her body from the torso down. When it happened, Jeff had been holding his head in a daze, leaning against an antimicrobial corner, staring at the plastic strip which held the adjoining wall panels together in place, while his own world disintegrated. He didn't see how the duty nurses knew, but they all jumped up at once to rush to her bed. No flatline beep like he'd seen in the movies. No orderlies shouting, "Clear!" Just a cacophony of jargon he didn't understand. A flurry of activity. And then it was over. It took a long time before they let him leave. First, a police officer insisted on interviewing him and offhandedly commenting on his theory that she must have taken the left turn in question because she thought she saw her grandson walking by. Then the hospital and coroner had a battery of papers for him to sign as next of kin. By the time he finally made his way down the hall from the ER unit to the hospital's front lobby, he was no longer aware that he couldn't feel his body anymore. As he shuffled past the smells of cheap cafeteria food and antiseptic spray, the din of the busy workplace, and the subliminally flickering fluorescent lights faded beyond the grip of his mind. Urgent movement caught his right eye. He awoke somewhat and turned to see a doctor in a lab coat walking briskly for him. Jeff briefly considered the man. His short, curled hair, thinning on top and totally white, contrasted strongly with his chocolate brown skin, though he seemed once to have been tall. A stooped back had already stolen a couple inches at least. Jeff guessed that he must be in his late 70s, if not his 80s. He wondered, through the fog of his mind, why a doctor of his age hadn't retired. Still, there was no denying the man's youthful energy. Despite his obvious age, he moved with a decisive spring in his stride. Seeing Jeff's attention on him, the man gestured to a manila folder in his hand.
"Jeffrey Falcas? I'm glad I caught you."
He briskly stepped even with Jeff on one side of the busy lobby.
"There's one last form they forgot to give you."
Please have them mail it. I already gave the address to my grandma's house where you can find me. 417 Armstrong Avenue.
The doctor persisted.
"Please, can't you just join me in the conference room for these? It will only take a few minutes more."
Jeff kept his eyes on the exit ahead. 30 more steps, and he'd be there.
Look, buddy, I don't know whether anyone's told you what I've just been through today.
The doctor moved ahead and tried to find Jeff's gaze.
"I know, and I'm very sorry for your loss. More than you know."
That was odd. Jeff's stride slowed, almost imperceptibly.
"But I wouldn't ask you if it weren't important, and I wouldn't ask you now, of all times, if it weren't urgent. Would you please look at me?"
Jeff's gait resumed its pace. Taking a few steps more, he stopped at the sliding double doors and turned to the man, looking him in the eyes for the first time. Jeff saw truth there. It seemed like the man really did believe what he was saying.
Now I've looked at you, and now you'll hear me. It's been a day, and I'm done.
He cut his hand through the air between them.
So no disrespect, but please mail it already, and bye.
Jeff plunged through the opening doors, and after a few moments, he knew that the doctor hadn't tried to follow this time. Though he seemed like one of the nicer staff members at the hospital, Jeff still couldn't stand the thought of talking to yet another lab-coated physician. The ravages of the day's loss had left his heart bleeding and tattered. Jeff stumbled forward in the slanting, golden light of the yard. He blinked. He could hardly believe that the sun had found a taxi waiting outside, gave the driver his address and his last 20, then passed out on the back seat.